All right, Shabbos, say good morning. Good morning. Let us begin by thanking all of our sponsors for this morning's share. To thank our Talmud Torah sponsors for the month of Sivan, Stephen Terry Zinn, for dedicating all the Shumer Joshos this month with gratitude to Hashem as they welcome their fifth grandchild, Gavriel Amichai Zinn, born to Shana and Eric Zinn of Rochester, New York, in loving memory of Dr. Zinn's mother, Doris Zinn Devora Bas Rabbi Yisrael Yoel. Shani and Avram Kelman, commemoration of the yahrzeit of Avram's father, Rafal Yechiel ben Avram, Zichron Lebracha, and our Daf Yomi sponsors for today, Mark and Shana Lebovitz, with Hakaras Hatov to Hashem on the birth of a granddaughter, Miriam Tzipora, born to their daughter-in-law, Joshua and son and daughter-in-law, Joshua and Alina Lebovitz, and niece to Asi Saichek and Matt Rishona Lebovitz. May her mother and father raise her, prepare her for Torah study, marriage, and good deeds. Mazel tov, mazel tov. Incredible, continued simchas for the entire Mishpach Emirat Hashem. So both sides. So let us begin. Today's daf is Kuf Yud Beis. Oh, thank you. Today's daf is Kuf Yud Beis. We are picking up Emirat Hashem on Kuf Yud Aleph Amud Aleph 111b, about 18 lines up from the bottom. So both say V'tana Didan Manavshach. So our Tana. Thank you. Thank you. So our Tana. Avaltana Didan Manavshach. So both say. So remember again, we're going through the different drashas of what we called the Tanakama of Achecha and various other opinions. So the Gemara says about Tani Didan, V'tani Didan Manavshach. So our Tana, how do we understand again their position? Iyaliv Sachir, Afilu Ger Toshav Nami. So because we're kind of like picking up mid-sentence over here a little bit, but if you go ahead and accept the drasha, the Gzer Shav of Sachir, then Halacha L'maisa that should include Ger Toshav, meaning include Ger Toshav, and tell us that Halacha L'maisa, a Ger Toshav is also subject to the prohibition of Baal Talon, of not withholding wages or not delaying wages. Ilo Yolav Sachir, and if he doesn't hold the Gzer Shav of Sachir, which we learned about yesterday, so Behema V'Kelim Minole. So from where would he know about the inclusion of Behema and Kelim? We saw this in yesterday's Mishnah, that if you rent someone's animal or someone's utensils and you fail to go ahead and pay the rental fee on time, that there could be an issue of Baal Talon for that as well. To which the Gemara says, you're right. The Olam Lo Yaliv Sachir. In reality, there's no Gzer Shava of Sachir. V'shayni Hasam de Amr Kra V'lo Salan Pu'ulas Sachir. And ultimately, again, this case is different. Why? Because the pasuk says, "Do not withhold the wages, right? The wages of literally your employee. Itcha ad boker, with you until morning. Kol shepu'ulaso itcha, which tells me that what does this apply to? Anything that works with you, whether that's people, whether that's utensils, or whether that's animals. Anything that is in your employ ultimately will be subject to this prohibition of Baal Talon. If that's the case, then it should include Ger Toshav as well. And Halacha L'maisa, again, a Ger Toshav is a non-Jew who lives with you but has repudiated idolatry. Amar Kroi Acha. Pasuk says Re'acha, that this halacha only applies to your fellow. Re'acha v'lo Ger Toshav. So Re'acha infers another Jew and not the Ger Toshav. Ihachi afilu behema v'kelim nami. If that's the case, then it shouldn't include rental fees for animals and utensils, because after all, again, you can't claim re'acha by animals and utensils. To which the Gemara says, Haksiv itcha. The pasuk says with you. So with you means anything that works, so to speak, with you, even animals. And even utensils. So the Gemara says, I understand. So we'll say here's the issue. The issue is we seem to have competing drashas. On one hand, we're saying Re'acha means only a fellow Jew and not a Ger Toshav, but yet itcha could go ahead and mean even animals and utensils, rental fees. So the Gemara says, how do you know what to include and what to exclude? In other words, with that drasha itcha, if you're including animals and utensils, I could just as easily include a Ger Toshav. And if you're going to exclude a Ger Toshav, I could just as easily exclude animal and utensils. To which the Gemara says, Mistabra behema v'kelim havelei l'rabos. it makes sense to say that you should include the rental fees for animals and utensils. Why? Sheken yeshnan bichlal mamon re'acha. Because they both say, it's interesting, the pasuk phrase is lashon of mamon re'acha, the money of your friend, they are, or I should say, the expression that Gemara is using is mamon re'acha, they are the money of your friend. So the same way that the wages are the money of your friend, right? So too again, the rental fees for the use of his utensils, for the use of his animals, is the money of your friend as well. And therefore should be included in the prohibition of baltolin. Ger toshav, on the other hand, eina bichlal mamon re'acha. Ger toshav, on the other hand, is not included in the concept of your friend's money. Okay? The Tanakama deme'achecha. So the Tanakama, who ultimately made the drasha of achecha. So the Gemara says, "Hi re'acha my avdile." What does he do with this pasuk of re'acha? What does he do with it? To which the Gemara says, "Homi ba'ile lechidesanya re'acha v'lo amaleki." Fascinating, right? Re'acha tells you that the prohibition of baltalan, of withholding wages, only applies to Re'acha, your fellow, and not to an Amalekite, someone from Amalek. So the Gemara says, Amaleki, me'achecha nafka. So the drasha of Amaleki, you could go ahead and exclude ultimately again from Achecha. In other words, I don't need Re'acha to go ahead and exclude Amaleki, so Achecha could go ahead and exclude Amaleki. So I said, this is fascinating. Chad mishra ashko v'chad mishra gozlo. So I will say, one is to go ahead and permit the withholding of wages from the Amaleki, and one is to go ahead and permit theft from the Amaleki. Now I will say, if you look at Rashi, Rashi says over here, Ashko is schar sachir, gozlo gzela mamish. So, right, so again, one pasuk, Sore'acha, one comes to teach me that you can withhold the wages of the Amaleki, and one that you're allowed to actually steal from the Amaleki. So I just want to point out, remember again yesterday's daf, we had the discussion about the difference between Oshek and Gezel. So it appeared that when it comes to withholding of wages, Oshek and Gezel will kind of be the same type of thing. When it comes to a theft perspective, Oshek and Gezel are two different things, right? Gezel means actively going over to someone, taking something from them. Oshek means the object came to my possession in a permitted way, and I'm choosing not to return it. So the Gemara suggests over here that when it comes to an Amaleki, both Gezel as well as Oshek are going to be permitted. So the Gemara says, Di'ashmo inan gozlo. The Gemara says, and you need both drashas. Why? This is very interesting. Di'ashmo inan gozlo, because if the halacha were to just tell me that theft from an Amaleki is permitted, mishum delo tarach bei. See, they both say, sometimes the thing that you're stealing from the Amaleki might be something he didn't toil in. For example, let's say the Amaleki found a $100 bill. He's not the owner of it. So the halacha is telling me I can go and I can take it from him. So I would have thought, when can I take something from the Amaleki? Only in a scenario where he didn't necessarily work for it, he came to it, so now I could take it from him. Aval ashka de tarach b'gabei imalo, but maybe by withholding his wages, he worked for his wages, so maybe I'm not allowed to go ahead and keep that. Therefore, the Gemara says v'yashmo inon ashko, and if it would have just said, we'll say first wide line on the bottom, and if it would have just said ashko, that I could withhold his wages, mishum delo asali adei, because the wages have not yet come into his possession. Aval gozlo de asali adei, but ultimately again is theft. Is theft, which means something that was in his possession, now I'm taking. Amalo, perhaps I should not be able to keep it or take it. Therefore, tzvicha. So both say, so fascinating. So according to the Tanakama of Achecha, he's going to say that from the words of Re'acha and Achecha, ultimately I'm learning two halachas. Number one, that you are allowed to withhold the wages of an Amaleki. And number two, that you're allowed to steal from an Amaleki. Quite fascinating. Okay. So Gemara says, Rabbi Yehuda, Hailo Solon Pula Sacher Itcha Ad Boker My Avidle. Rabbi Yehuda, what do you do with the phrase, do not withhold the wages of a paid worker until the morning? So in Rabbi Yasi, Rabbi Yasi, Afilu lo Sachra Ela Liftzar lo Eshkol Echad Shalanovim over Mishum Baltolin. So Rabbi said, this is interesting. So he'll use the drasha for the following idea, that even if you hired a worker just to harvest one cluster of grapes, the prohibition of Baltolin still applies. In other words, what does that mean? I might have thought that let's say if I hire someone for a very small job, right? A very small job. Rashi points out over here, schir sha'os, really just for a couple of hours. Perhaps when employment is below such a minimal threshold that perhaps the prohibition of Baltolin withholding wages shouldn't apply. Kamash malon it does. Okay, so the Gemara goes weiter. V'idach meve'elav hu noses nafsho nafka. The other opinion says no. We'll say obviously the prohibition of withholding wages applies to anything, right? Applies to any earned wages. Where does he learn this from? From the pasuk of elav hu noses nafsho, that the worker. So we'll say, so just to point out that the context over here, the pasuk is lo sashok esrei acha v'lo sigzol. Right, so don't withhold his wages, don't steal from him. Lo salon pulas sachir itcha ad boker, and do not go ahead and withhold this. So we'll say, so that's Vayikra. The next pasuk is Bayomo titein scharo v'lo tava alav shemesh ki anihu ve'elav hu noses nafsho. Now we'll say the other pasuk which highlights the concept that the worker may be poor ve'elav hu noses nafsho, and literally again, literal translation is he's lifting his soul to you, which essentially means he is fully and wholly dependent on you in order to be able to make his parnasa. So the Gemara says something very interesting. So therefore the Gemara says, I'm sorry, Rabbi Asi will learn this out. Me'elav hu noses nafsho nafka. Davar hamoser nafsho alav. So I will say, what is this thing that people are moser nefesh for? It's actually an incredible Gemara. What is this thing? We'll say, moser nefesh literally means you give over your soul for something. That you put your entirety into something and you give yourself over in totality for it. Moser nefesh almost means like a sense of self-sacrifice. What is something that people self-sacrifice for? Top of Kuf Yud Beis. That refers to parnasa. So therefore, again, what do you see from here? Anything, any unit of parnasa that a person is moser nafsho for, there is a prohibition of bal talin. So if the worker is moser nefesh, meaning he engages in self-sacrifice, he gives over himself to earning a living, I can't withhold his wages. Top of Kuf Yud Beis, v'idach, the other opinion will say, the other opinion will say, no, you need this drasha for the following idea. We'll say a very beautiful and beautiful brayse. The top of Kuf Yud Beis 112a. Ve'elav hu noses nafsho. The pasuk says, so it's interesting how these psukim don't just simply say that you have to pay your worker on time. There's a lot of other strong lashon over here, right? So in this pasuk we're talking about over here, is telling us the worker might be an ani. Ve'elav hu noses nafsho. And literally again, he's giving over his soul to you. He's being moser nefesh. There's self-sacrifice involved in the pursuit of his parnas, in the pursuit of his livelihood. Don't withhold his wages. Pay him on time. So the Gemara goes, Ve'elav hu noses nafsho. So for this job, remember again, for this employment, so the employee is noses nafsho, he gives over his soul. Mipnei ma ala ze bakevesh v'nitla be'ilan. So what's the thing about this worker? Now, obviously talking about over here like an agricultural worker. For what reason has this worker gone up on the ramp, right, or climbed high in the tree, umasras atzmo lemisa, and has literally been willing to risk his life, lo al scharo? Is it not for his wage? In other words, I will say, what the Gemara is highlighting over here, the lashon of elav hu noses nafsho is this lashon. The Gemara is understanding that sometimes a person is even willing to put their life in peril. Right? They're willing to put their life in peril, climb high in the tree, climb high in the ramp. Why is a person willing to put their life in peril? And what's the answer? The answer is for their parnasa, in order to be able to earn a wage, in order to be able to earn a living. So halacha l'maisa, if the worker is being moser nefesh in such a dramatic way, the least that the employer could do is what? Pay on time. So I would say there's also a tremendous Musar Haskell in this, a really beautiful Musar Haskell. And I would say we all know this. We understand this dynamic of being willing to be Moser Nefesh for our Parnasa. I think every person does this. Okay, maybe not climbing into the trees or doing other things, and perhaps not things that put my life at risk, but this notion that we are Moser Nefesh to earn Parnasa. We engage in tremendous self-sacrifice in order to earn a living, whatever form that self-sacrifice takes. It could be self-sacrifice of sacrificing time with my family, sacrificing time of relaxation, sacrificing other opportunities that I may have in life for personal development because I have to earn a living. That is the nature. That is the nature of earning a living. That's what Baruch Hu says to Adam Arishon, B'zeh sapecha tochal lechem. That's saying, sometimes you do see people in this world who, Baruch Hashem, seem to be successful and expend very little effort. So often when we see people like this, we look at them, they're a total anomaly because they represent the antithesis of the human condition, which is if you want to be successful, you have to work very hard. And if you want material success, there is tremendous amount of self-sacrifice in that. It's just important for us to understand that the same way all of us bring that level of discipline and self-sacrifice to our gashmius, to the pursuit of our livelihood and the pursuit of our material success, we have to be willing to bring that same level of mesiras nefesh, that same level of self-sacrifice to our spiritual success. See, sometimes we're willing to work hard for money, but we're not willing to work hard for spirituality. I'm willing to give things up to be materially successful, but I'm not willing to give things up to be spiritually successful. And that's not the way it works. The recipe for success is the same in every single area of life. You have to, if you want to be successful in something, you have to decide, A, what it is that you want, and what are you willing to give up in order to get it. It's the same thing with money, and it's the same thing with spirituality. Just sometimes when it comes to ruchnius, I want the success, but I'm not really willing to push myself hard. And I'm not really willing to engage in self-sacrifice. And I'm not really willing to create hierarchy or priorities in order to get what I want. Parnasa, I know exactly what I have to do. I know exactly where I have to push myself in order to get what I want. But the Gemara says the same way that there's mesiras nefesh for parnasa, however, we have to make sure that we're willing to be moser nefesh for our ruchnius as well. The Gemara goes weiter. Davar achar, beautiful Gemara. Davar achar, ve'elav hu noseis nafsho. Bazik says the worker literally again gives his soul over to you. So it's a very profound Gemara. When you withhold wages, it's as if you're going in and taking someone's life. Taking someone's life. That's literally the lashon over here. Now I will say, now here's an interesting machlokes. Whose life are you taking? So Rav Huna Rav Chisda, Chad Amar Nafsho Shal Gazlan, V'Chad Amar Nafsho Shal Nigzal. That is an interesting machlokes over here. Whose life are you taking? So again, the lashon of a love who knows say nafsho. Sorry. So again, I will say what the Gemara is seizing on over here is this lashon of nafsho, life. Right? Pasuk could have just said, somebody works for you. Don't be a jerk and pay them on time. That's it. The guy you owe the guy money. If you owe someone money, just give it. Just give it, don't withhold it. Why the drama of ve'elav hu nosei nafsho? Literally, again, this guy is, literal translation is lifting his life towards you. Like there's like almost like an element of, his life is at stake. So again, first interpretation, well, sometimes people do put their life at stake in order to go ahead and earn a parnasa. And if this guy is doing agricultural work for you, and he's going ahead and climbing trees for you, he's putting his life at risk. Or even if he's not actually putting his life at risk, he's sacrificing many things in life in order to make this parnasa. So give him what he's owed. Other interpretation of the Gemara says, no. When you withhold wages from someone, you're literally taking their life. You're literally taking their life. So the Gemara says, okay, listen to this. So Rav Huna Rav Chisda Chadamar Nafshel Shal Gazlan, the Chadamar Nafshel Shal Nigzal. Rabbi said, there's an interesting machlokes over here. Whose life are you taking? One opinion says that you, the employer, just understand, when you don't pay someone, you're taking your own life in your hands. Other opinion says, no, you're taking the life of the employee. So the Gemara says, watch this. So the opinion that says that it's talking about the life of the employer, so it's calling him the gazlan. It's calling him the thief because he's withholding the wages. So the opinion that says that it's talking about the life of the thief, tichsiv, al tigzal dal, do not steal from the pauper, kidalhu, because he is poor. Vi al tidake ani bishar. And literally, again, do not go ahead and push down the ani in the marketplace. Uksiv, ki Hashem yoriv rivam, because the pasuk says, because if you oppress the ani, take advantage of the poor, Hashem will wage their battles for them. The kavo es kovehem nefesh, and ultimately, again, will steal from those who steal from them. Will steal life. So Chodesh Baruch Hu essentially will take your life. If you steal from the poor, Hashem will take your life. So from here you see that when you withhold wages, effectively stealing from someone, HaKadosh Baruch Hu is going to quote unquote steal back from you. Uman damar nafsho shal nigzal, but the opinion that says no, it's not talking about the life of the employer. of the thief, but rather it's talking about if you don't pay your employee, it's as if you're stealing their life. The pasuk says when you steal from someone, you're taking their soul. Right? You steal from someone, you're taking their soul. So as much as money is not life, right? Money is life, right? Money is life. People who say money is not life, usually when do people say that? When they have it, right? When they have it. When you don't have it and you can't pay your bills and you live with that constant sense of anxiety and stress, so life is not life. Life is not life. So therefore the Gemara says at the end of the day, when you go out and you steal from someone, you're taking their soul. You're taking their life. So now the Gemara says, so the point over here is something interesting. So you see from here that halacha l'maisa withholding wages. So one opinion says, well listen, when you withhold wages, just know you're taking your own life into your hands. Because Kadosh Baruch Hu fights the battles of the poor. Second opinion says, you're depriving the employee of just any semblance of normal life. You're depriving him of life. So now the Gemara asks what each one does with the other pasuk. V'idach nami haksiv es nefesh bailav yikach. But the pasuk says, what does the other opinion do with the fact that it says that you're taking the nefesh bailav? To which the Gemara says, bailav the hashta. It means ultimately again the owner now. The owner now is the thief, is the employer. V'idach nami haksiv kavas koveim. What does the other opinion do with the pasuk that it says, I will curse those who curse them, or literally steal from those who steal from them? Matam kamer. The Gemara is almost as reading as a cause and effect. Matam kavas kovehem. Ultimately, why is it Kadosh Baruch Hu will exact punishment from the one who steals, from the employer who withholds the wages? Mishum dinat lo nefesh, because ultimately, again, he has taken the life of the pauper. Okay, Shabbos says. So bottom line is don't hold back wages, right? That's the takeaway. Takeaway from this is that you owe someone money, pay them in a timely fashion. We've seen now, again, I will say what's considered timely. So we've seen that. That's really dependent on the nature and duration of the employment. But Allah Khamais, whatever that window is, there's an obligation to go ahead and pay back. We'll say if a person fails to pay, what we've seen is one is in violation of 5 prohibitions and one positive commandment. We've also seen the Torah phrases this in 2 different ways, Oshek and Gezel. And whereas Oshek and Gezel mean 2 different things in the realm of what we'll call regular theft, right? Remember, Gezel means actively taking something from someone. Oshek, something came to your possession in a permitted fashion, you retain it and you don't give it back. When it comes to really withholding of wages, it's pretty much the same thing. The Torah just phrased it in 2 different ways. Good. So we'll say, let's go weiter. So we'll say, this is a very interesting detail in this discussion. So Masai, when is that so? When is that so that halacha l'maisa, the employer is in violation of baltalan, of withholding wages? Masai, bisman shetavo. So we'll say this is fascinating. The Mishnah said that one is only obligated in withholding wages, or one is only liable for withholding wages, after the employee has come to claim his wage. Right? But if the employee doesn't claim his wage, then halacha l'maisa, I, the employer, am not liable. So in other words, just to be clear, when someone does work for me, of course I have an obligation to pay. Right? That's not what we're talking about over here. We're talking about specifically the biblical prohibition to not delay payment to an employee. What the Mishnah is suggesting is that only sets in if the employee comes and asks me for payment. Then at that point in time, that triggers the window. And once the window is triggered, failure to pay within the prescribed window ultimately results in multiple biblical prohibitions. But if the employee never comes to me, I still have an obligation to pay, but there's no baltalin, right? There's no delay, there's no prohibition of delaying a payment. Very interesting. So the Gemara says as follows. Let's analyze this. Lo salin pula sacher. So on one hand, the Torah says, do not delay paying your employee. Yachal afilu lo tavo. You might have thought this applies even if the employee never comes and asks for payment. Amar le itcha. So therefore, I'll say the pasuk says, do not go ahead and delay the payment. Right? Do not. So the lashon of the pasuk is lo salin pulas sachir itcha. So literally translated, do not delay the payment of the employee with you. with you. What is that itcha? What is that itcha? So the Gemara says, very interesting. Itcha l'daitcha. You have to know. In other words, so the way this works, I will say, is the prohibition of Baal Talin is only triggered when the employer knows that he has an obligation to pay. When does the employer know that he has an obligation to pay? When the employee shows up and says, hey, just want to let you know, finish the job, ready for payment. Okay, so once now awareness has been triggered, then halacha l'maisa, that's when the window begins, and that's when the employer has an obligation to pay. The Gemara says, so this is very interesting, right? So we'll say this is also, by the way, a tremendous Musar Haskell. You say to yourself, one second, really? The employee needs to come to the employer, tell him that he's finished? Yeah, we'll say, a lot of times in life, we assume people know things, right? And therefore what happens? We get upset when they fail to act, thinking that, come on, you know what needs to be done. I will say, how many times in life does it happen that we get upset at people for not doing things? And meanwhile, what happened? They don't know. We speak about this often, right? Even in the realms of relationships, right? In a marriage or a different relationship where I expect something from someone, right? And they don't come through. And I'm so disappointed, so disillusioned, so let down. Meanwhile, they didn't know. Nevuah stopped with the Beis HaMikdash, right? There are no more Nevi'im. So if somebody can't know what you want unless, of course, you tell them. No matter how much they love you, they can't read your mind. Hope my wife listens to this podcast, right? They can't read your mind. They absolutely can't read your mind. So I will say, this is an incredible yesod. See here, the employee finished his work. Okay, so I guess you would assume the employer is going to know. I don't know, maybe the employer is out somewhere. So therefore the halacha is, there's no Baal Talin until the employee says to the employer, hey, finished, right? Ready to get paid. Here's the bill. Only then is the prohibition of Baal Talin triggered. Incredible. So the Gemara goes weiter. So the Gemara says, Talmud Lomar, so I'm sorry. So fine. Yachal afilu lo tavo. Talmud Lomar itcha ledaitcha. Yachal afilu ein lo. So we'll say this is interesting. What happens if the employer doesn't have money? He doesn't have the money now to pay. I might have thought that there's a prohibition about Talin, even if the owner doesn't have the money. Talmud Lomar itcha sheyesh itcha. So we're using this word itcha for a lot of different reasons over here. Itcha means what? With you. With you means you have the money. You have the money. So we'll say this is actually very interesting. The prohibition of Baal Talin presupposes that the employer has the money and yet is withholding it. Therefore, the Gemara directions over here, if the employer doesn't yet have the money and therefore can't pay the employee, again, there's no Baal Talin. Now, again, that is not a good position to put yourself in life, right? Halacha l'maisa, again, you should pay your employees on time, but should you not have the money, there is no prohibition of Baal Talin. Fascinating. Talmud Lomar itcha, sheyesh itcha, yachal afiu himcho etzel chen v'ni ve'etzel shulchani. Now, both say, so this is the Mishnah as well. I would have thought the prohibition of Baal Talin applies even if you send your employee to a third party. For example, Reuven worked for me. I owe him $1,000. I say, no problem, Reuven. Here's the deal that I have. I have store credit with the storekeeper over there. Go to him, buy $1,000 of goods, assuming that this was what we agreed upon beforehand, or go to the shulchani, the money changer. He's got my money. He'll pay you. So I'll say, so again, I'm not playing games. This is really how I'm paying him. And now let's say Reuven goes to one of these people. They don't have the goods or they don't have the funds. You might have thought that I am in violation of Baal Talin. Talmud Lomar itcha v'lo shemchu eitzel chen v'ni ve'etzel shulchani. Therefore, the pasuk says, with you, the prohibition of Baal Talin is only when I am paying the direct wages and I'm not outsourced it to a third party. Sefer Abosai, three tremendous things coming out from one little word. Itcha teaches me number one, the prohibition of Baal Talin is only triggered when the employee comes to me and tells me he's done and is ready for payment. Number two, itcha only applies if I, the employer, have money. And number three, itcha only applies if I am paying his wage directly, but not if his wage has been assigned to a third party. Incredible. Let's go back there. So I'll say, so now let's focus on this third piece. So I will say, so again, Reuven was working for me, I owe him $1,000. The way I worked it out with him is, he's going to get $1,000 worth of store credit, right, at the shop, at the general store, right? Or for that matter, again, I'm sending him to the shopkeeper, to the money changer, the money changer is going to pay him. Reuven gets to these guys, and they can't pay him. Whatever it is, for whatever reason, they can't pay him right now. I am not in violation of Baal Talin. So the Gemara says, Ibailu, so we'll say, so now, and now I understand why, because the drush of Itcha. So now the Gemara asks an interesting question. Ibailu, chozer or eno chozer? So we'll say, now listen to this. Granted, I'm not in violation of Baal Talin. Okay, so we've already established that. But now, could Ruvain come back to me and could Ruvain say, hey, Silber, I just want to let you know, the money changer can't pay me, or for that matter, again, the shopkeeper can't, so I want my money from you. This Ruvain, in other words, again, to be clear, we've already established, I, the employer, am not going to be in violation of Baal Talin, but does Ruvain have the legal right to circle back to me and to then get payments from me? So the Gemara says, Rav Sheshes says, no, Ruvain cannot come back to me. Rabba Amar Chozer. Rabba says, no, he absolutely has the ability to come back to me. So let's analyze this. Amar Rabba. Rabba says, from where do I know that halacha l'maisa? That Ruvain could come back to me. From where do I know that? Over alav. So we'll say, since the Mishnah said, when I assign payment to a third party, and that third party fails to pay, I, the employer, am not in violation of Baal Talin. So the Gemara says, Ma'aver hu dalo avar, ha me hadar hadar. What do you see from this? I'm not in violation. And I will say, but Reuven has every right to still come back to me, right? So in other words, I'm not in violation because of Baal Talin for a technical reason, but Lamaisa, I still am the employer, and therefore, again, if Reuven can't collect his wages from the third party, Reuven has absolutely every right to come back to me. But Rav Sheshes will say, "My eino over." So Rav Sheshes will say, at the end of the day, halacha l'maisa. What does it mean that I'm not over on Baal Talin? What does it mean I'm not in violation? Eino b'toras la'avar. It means I'm not in the parsha, so to speak, right? I'm not even in the parsha of Baal Talin. I'm not in the context. I'm not in the legal framework. Which means what? When I assign payment of my employee to a third party, I'm out. We've all agreed on this. And therefore I am out of the picture. So therefore, not only am I not in violation of Baal Talin, but the truth is you can't come back to me if the money changer or the shopkeeper is not paying you. In other words, that's your issue with them. We worked this out. I'm out of the equation. I will say, how do we paskin? So we paskin ultimately, again, like Rabbi, the Rambam paskin is interesting. The Rambam doesn't quote this halacha explicitly. Instead, it's the Kesef Mishnah who quotes this halacha and understands how the Rambam paskins, like Rabbah. Namely, in this case, that even though I've gone ahead and I have assigned the payment of the Reuven's wages to a third party, to the shopkeeper, to the money changer, if they fail to pay Reuven absolutely has every legal right to come back to me and demand payment. That being said, because the wages were assigned, I'm not in violation of Baal Talin. So Reuven has a right to come back to me and demand payment, but I'm not in violation of Baal Talin. So we also pass like these other two pieces as well, that the prohibition of Baal Talin only applies if you have money. Let's say again, Reuven finishes his work for me and I'm out of funds. Halacha l'maisa, I'm not in violation of Baal Talin. And number three, the prohibition of Baal Talin is only triggered when Reuven, the employee, comes and asks me for payment. If he doesn't ask me, then the prohibition of again, even if he doesn't ask me, I will say, to be clear, I still have an obligation to pay my employees, right, and to pay them in a timely fashion. Just in the technical prohibition of Baal Talin, it's only triggered when the employee goes ahead and asks me for payment. Okay, let's go back there. Says the Gemara, we'll say an interesting case here. Boy, mi name Rav Sheshes. Kablanus over mishum Baal Talin or ain't over mishum Baal Talin. So we'll say this is a fascinating discussion. Let's analyze this for just a bit. So remember again, up until now, what we've been really focusing on is the concept of Baal Talin as it applies to a hired laborer. Now again, we've seen a day laborer, a night laborer, a person who's contracted as a laborer for a week, a month, a year, 7 years. We've seen schar shos, someone who's contracted to work for a part of a day or a whole day. Now we're going to a different form of employment called a kablan. Kablan is what we would call a contractor. So I'm hiring someone to do a job, right? There's X amount of dollars to do the job, but I'm not really controlling when you work. Right? So I'm hiring someone to build me a house. So you go ahead and say, here's X amount of dollars to build a house. I need you to get it done in X amount of time. When you do it, how you do it, when you work, that's on you. So I'll say, now the shaila is, does the prohibition of Baal Talin apply to a kablon or not? Does it apply to a kablon, or is it stafka a contracted worker? So kabbalah is over mishum batalin, in over mishum batalin. So the most Sigmar says, what is this dependent on? This is actually quite fascinating. First, I'll take a look at Rashi. Kabbalah, Rashi says, Uman shekibal alav lasos melacha b'kach v'kach v'lo b'schirus yom. So also remember again, so a kablon is the type of employment that's not really dictated by time, as opposed to the sachir, as opposed to the laborer who we've been working on with up until now, who has been contracted for, like I said, a certain amount of hours, days, weeks, months, years. Kablon is given a project and told, get the project done, get the project done. Get the project done. So does Baal Talon apply to him? So both sides, the Gemara says it's machlokes. What is it machlokes based on? So the Gemara says, Uman kona b'shevach kli v'halvahi, o ein uman kona b'shevach kli uschirsi. Okay, so both sides, let's talk about this just a little bit. This is really quite interesting. So let's deal with the following situation. Imagine for a moment that I go ahead and I hire Ruvain as a kablon, as a contractor, to go ahead and, we'll call it, make me a piece of jewelry. Let's keep it like this. Make me a gold necklace. So the interesting shaila is, how do we view Ruvain's relationship with that utensil? So let's say I'm giving Ruvain the raw materials, and I'm telling him, fashion it into a piece of jewelry. So now, how do we view this? Do we say that essentially Ruvain, through his improvement of the raw materials into a finished piece, essentially acquires an ownership interest in the item, and therefore when he's done, essentially what he does is he sells it back to me? Right? That sale representing, again, his labor, any additional materials, that's called Uman Kona B'Shevach Kli. That literally, again, a craftsman almost acquires an ownership interest in the item through improving and through working with the item. Right? Or do we say, no, that's not how it works? In other words, he's an employee and he never has an ownership interest in the Kli itself, and instead, I just go ahead and pay him for his time and for his effort. And I will say, you'll say to yourself, who cares? It sounds academic. It's not academic at all. Why? Because if you hold Uman Kona B'Shevach Kli, then I will say, essentially, my payment to him is really repayment of a debt. Right? I owed him money. He essentially lent me money. How did he lend me money? With his service, with his time. And he acquired an ownership interest. And now I'm paying him, so to speak, for his interest in the utensil. In which case, the payment that I give him at the end of the duration of the service is like a halva. It's like repayment of a loan. Versus if you hold ein uman kona b'shevach kli, that a craftsman doesn't acquire any ownership interest in the utensil itself, then it's a wage. I will say, what's the difference if payment is a wage versus if payment is a debt, is a repayment of a loan? What's the difference? Baal Talin. Baal Talin only applies to wages, doesn't apply to payment of loans or debts. So take a quick look at Rashi just a moment. Uman kona b'shevach kli v'zocha b'ma she'eshbichu. So do we say that when a craftsman works with an object, he acquires literally an ownership interest based on his improvement to the object? Or mishum kablanuso yotzelo kishemachzirolo hariyu kimocherlo shevach shahilo b'socho. And therefore, again, I will say it's almost as if that when I pay the kablan, I'm buying out his portion. I'm not paying him a wage. I'm buying out his ownership interest. So you hear that distinction? Better to say it like that than even as a loan, right? So in other words, do we say that when a kablan works on a utensil, essentially, through his improvement represents his ownership interest. When he's finished, I'm buying out his ownership interest in the utensil. Or no, he's working for a wage, and I'm buying out his wage. So the Gemara says, here we go. So the Gemara says, so do we say that the uman, the craftsman, essentially acquires an ownership interest in the utensil through his improvement of the object, and therefore, again, when I pay him back, I'm paying back a debt, and therefore, again, there's no Baal Talin? Or, ein uman kona b'shevach kli uschirasi, or no, this is not, the uman doesn't acquire any ownership interest. This is a paid position, and therefore I owe him a wage, and because I owe him a wage, therefore it's subject to Baal Talin. Rav Sheshes over. Rav Sheshes says, ein uman kona b'shevach kli, right? Ultimately, again, a craftsman does not acquire ownership interest in the improvement of the object. Therefore, this is just a wage. It's just a wage, and therefore it's subject to Baal Talin. The Gemara says, really? Vatanya eino over. I'm sorry. So Rav Sheshes Amar over. Vatanya. I'm sorry. Right. So Rav Shesha says, right, ein uman kono b'sheva achli, it's just the wage, and therefore I'm in violation of Baal-Talon. V'ayvatanya ein over. Where Bryson says that you're not over, which would seem to indicate that uman kono b'sheva achli, a craftsman does in fact acquire an ownership interest, and therefore again when I pay him, he's essentially selling me his ownership interest. To which he says, Hasam shemcho etzel chenveni ve'etzel shulchani. So also it's possible that case is talking about a situation when we say ein over, where what? I assigned payment to a third party. And as we said before, when you assign payment to a third party, the owner or the employer is not subject to Baal-Talon. Name is it. So it says, that supports this. Hanosim taliso lo uman gamra vodiolo mikan va'arasar yom eino over mishum Baal-Talon. So what's the interesting halacha? If I give my cloak to an uman to work on it, and the uman goes ahead and tells me it's finished, even though, again, he's been telling me it's been finished for 10 days. He says, pick it up anytime in the next 10 days. I'm not in violation of Baal-Talon. Rabbi said, this is interesting. Why am I not in violation of Baal-Talon in this case? Because the Uman hasn't given it back to me. Right? There's another piece, by the way, that the clock for Baal-Talon is only triggered the same way that the employee has to tell me that he finished. He also has to give me back the object. If the object is still in his possession, then Allah said there's no Baal-Talon in that situation. Nasnulo b'chatzi hayom, but let's say again he returns to me the talus in the middle of the day. So let's remember again, this is how this works with the Kabbalah. He returns at midday, you have the rest of that day to pay, and if you don't, it's Baal-Talon. So the Gemara says, okay, so what do you see from here? You see from here that a Uman is subject to Baal-Talon. Incredible. So the Gemara says, now if you say that a Uman, when he works on an object, he acquires an ownership interest in it, and therefore when he finishes and returns it back to me, it's almost as if he's selling me his ownership interest, and therefore this is not a wage-based transaction, then am I over? Then why would he be over? The fact that he's over, Abosai, indicates to us that what? That a Uman, that a craftsman is treated just like a regular employee, a wage-based employee. Asavo said that seems to prove this. No. Begarda de Sarbala. Ultimately, also we were talking about someone who combs out fabric. So apparently, again, someone who combs out fabric. Garda de Sarbala, Rashi says, Polikar balaz she'in kan shevach klishim haya manicho kimoso shuhaisa miskayemes harbe yosemeata. So apparently, again, I will say, when you comb out or tease out the fabric, it actually weakens it a little bit. It makes it nicer, but it weakens it a little bit. So maybe because there's no technical improvement over here, that's why it doesn't acquire it. The Gemara says, come on. That's not true. And I was supposed to say, even though on a technical level you may be weakening the fabric, but the process itself is considered to be an improvement. And because it's considered to be improvement, therefore if you hold Uman Kono B'Shevachli, it should work. To which the Gemara says, no. What's the case over here? The case is where I hired someone to stamp on my fabric, and the way it worked is batsha ubatsha b'ma'asa. The way it worked is for every stamp that he did, I paid him a ma'a. So in a case like this, where clearly he's being paid for incremental action, right? Every act that he does is worth a certain amount of money. Everyone would agree in a case like that. Ein uman kona b'shevach kli. So in general, the halacha is the way we paskin is that a kablon is subject to Baal-Talon. So even if you hire a contractor, once that contractor finishes his work, again, depending when he finishes his work, if he finishes it during the day, you have the rest of that day, the night, the rest of that night. But halacha l'maisa, a contractor is subject to Baal-Talon. Now, based on, again, because we happen to paskin, ein uman kona b'shevach kli, we hold that a contractor does not acquire an ownership interest in the utensil itself, but rather, again, he's considered to be just like a regular wage worker. Okay, incredible. Abosai, Amud Beis, 112b, Sachir bizmano nishba v'nota. So I'll say, interesting halacha over here. Very interesting halacha. So remember again, I will say, if I have a hired worker, one of the things that the Mishnah taught me was like this. So I hire Ruvain, right? Ruvain did work for me, and now again he comes to get his wage, right? So he follows the halacha, he tells me, Silber, you owe me money. I say, Ruvain, I'm pretty sure I paid you. Or better stated, I paid you. So what's the halacha? So the halacha is Ruvain swears that he was not paid, and he has the ability to collect payment. Now, we'll say, this only works if he makes his claim in what we'll call the Baal-Talon window. the Baltalin window, right? So Ruvain, let's say, finishes, if he's working for a couple hours, he finishes midday, just to give you the easiest case. He finishes midday, and he comes, he says, Silber, pay me my money. I say, I paid you, or whatever it is, I don't owe you any, whatever the situation is. He swears during that window and gets repaid. However, the Mishnah said, if he waits past his Baltalin window, then he is not believed with an oath. So the Gemara says, let's analyze this. So Sachir, Amai Takhin Rabbanan L'Mishtaba V'Shaka. And I both say, now normally this is not the way Shavuos work, right? Normally the way a Shavuot works is that the employer would swear that he paid or that he doesn't owe money and that he's done. It's interesting over here that we allow the employee to swear and go ahead and take his money. So the Gemara says, why did the rabbis institute that the employee has the ability to swear that he hasn't gotten paid and just take his money? So the Gemara says, Amrav Tihuda, Amr Shmuel, halachos kidolos shanukan. These are big halachos that we've gone and established. Now, in general, the lashon of halachos, ultimately again is a doraisa, right? These are big halachos that we've instituted over here. To which the Gemara says, "Hani hilchos aninu." These aren't halachos. This is not halacha. Generally, it's like halacha l'Moshe Sinai. This is not the halacha l'Moshe Sinai. They both say these are rabbinic enactments. Rather, again, hani takanos ninu. These are takanos. They both say this idea that halacha l'maisa, an employee could swear that he didn't get paid and take his money. That's not a din da'oraisa. That is a din d'Rabbanan. That's a takana. To which the Gemara says, you're right. Amar Rabbi Yehuda Amar Shmuel takanos gidol shanukan. Oh, you're right. Sorry, wrong word. These are big takanas, right? Big dinei d'Rabbanan. So the Gemara says, Michlal, so gidolos, Michlal diika kitanos. So I will say, so again, these are big halachas, and what? There are other small halachas. I will say, you ever get into a conversation like this where no matter what you say, it is going to be wrong, right? No matter what you say. So the Gemara says as follows. The Gemara says over here, it's almost as if like the Gemara is looking to start up. The halachas, these aren't halachas. You're right. I'm sorry. Takanas gidolos, great takanas. Oh, and what? Some rabbinic laws are big. Some are small. What? The Gemara says, no. Calm down. Takanos kivuos shanukan. Rather, what the Gemara is trying to highlight over here is takanos kavos. Takanos kavos means these are important enactments that need to be established as everyday normative law. Take a look at Rashi. Takanos kavos, it's the last of the wide lines. Ro'i lasosan keva, lakar aleim davar min Torah. These halachos, these dinei d'Rabbanan are incredibly important to the point that even they should uproot normative biblical law. Now, what does that mean? Now, as we just said before, midaraisa, when you are being petitioned for payment, the way it works is like this. Who swears? The person who quote unquote owes the money. He swears that he does not owe the money and he's done. So normally the way it would work is like this. If someone claims that they owe you, that you owe them money, you would take a shavua that you do not, and you're done. That would be the din da'oraisa. What's interesting over here is Chazal took the shvua and flipped it onto the employee and said, employee, you swear that you are owed money, and once you take that oath, the employer owes you money. Comes Rav Nachman and said the name of Shmuel, this is a very important halacha. So the Gemara says, Kan shvua de balabayisi, because really, the shvua should be taken by the employer, V'akru Rabbanan l'shvua de balabayisi shajua as-sachir. And Chazal took the shvua that really should have been taken by the balabais, by the employer, and instead gave the right to swear to the employee. Why? Mishum kidei chayav desachir. Because they will say this is necessary for the livelihood of the employee. In other words, Chazal needed to create a situation where the employee controls the process, thereby ensuring that he's going to get paid. Right? So like this, what they did is they took the shvua, they put it on the employee. Say, employee, you have all the power. So if you are claiming that you did not get paid, swear to that effect in Beis Din, and Beis Din will get you your money. That's the way this works. And all of this done, and this fits in very beautifully to the Gemara that we saw in Amud Aleph. We saw in the beginning of today's daf, that literally, again, earning a parnasa is mesiras nefesh, is self-sacrifice. Could sometimes even be sakanas nefashos. Earning a living is incredibly important, and therefore what Chazal did is they wanted to give that power to the employee. So you have the ability to take the oath, swear that you didn't get paid, get your money and go home. So Gemara says, I understand. So I understand. So because we want the balabayis, right? Because we want the employee to go ahead and make his money, right? Because we want the employee to make his money. So therefore, again, halacha l'maisa, we put the balabayis at a loss. Does that make sense? In other words, so you want to put the employee at an advantage. So you put the balabayis at a disadvantage. To which the Gemara says, no. Balabayis gufei nechalei demishtaba sacher v'shakil ki hechi deliskeru leipolim. No, it's not true. We'll say this works actually good for everyone. How does it work good for everyone? Because if the employees are happy, then the balabais will have an easier time finding them, right? In other words, I will say if people are reticent to trust an employer, or people are reticent to trust the system that they're going to get paid, it's going to be much harder to find employees. So because now the system is set up that the employee pretty much has all the power, right? That he could swear that he did not get paid and he gets paid. This works better for the labor market. People will be more willing to go to work for others since they know they have the power to control the narrative. So the Gemara says, "Schir gufei nechalei demishtar balabayis v'yifka ki hechi delegru balabayis." I can say just the opposite. But now, why can't you say like this? That halacha l'maisa. And so now we're saying we're going to give the employee the power to take the shvuah and therefore control the narrative, and therefore he's going to be more willing to rent himself out or hire himself out to work. But I could say just the opposite. I could say just halacha l'maisa. But if you gave the shvuah to the employer, then halacha l'maisa, he would feel more empowered, and by feeling more empowered, he would be more willing to go ahead and hire workers. To which the Gemara says, no, al karche agar. Also, the employer has to hire workers regardless. In other words, you don't have to incentivize him to hire workers. Why not? Because halacha l'maisa, either way, right? He needs to hire people because he needs labor. He needs labor. The Gemara says, sacher nami bal karche isker. But you could say the same thing ultimately again about the sacher as well. The sacher also has to hire himself out regardless. In other words, people need to earn a living, and they need to earn a living regardless. Ella, both say here it is. Ella, balabayis Torah b'poligal. Both say in general in this situation, what are we concerned about? So both say it's actually very interesting. We're not concerned that the balabayis is going to lie. That's not it, right? We're not concerned that the employer is going to lie and knowingly withhold wages. What are we concerned about? That often an employer has a lot of different employees that he's managing. So he thinks he paid someone, but he didn't. So again, I will say this is very interesting. We're not worried over here about a case of malice or about a case of theft. We're actually worried over here about a case of confusion. So because the balabayis has, I will say, here's the difference, right? The employer has to worry about a lot of people. The employee only has to worry about himself. So therefore, we trust him a little bit more to have clarity about this situation. So I'll say if that's the case, that we're convinced that the employee has clarity and the employer does not. If the employee claims that he did not get paid, why don't you just give him the money without a shvuah? The Mishnah says, no. The Gemara says, if that's the case, kidei lahafiz daito shabalabais. No, because that's not right. Because remember, again, in this case, the balabais, the employer, is still claiming that he paid. Right? So the shvuah is necessary to put the balabais' mind at ease that he's not being taken advantage of. So why not say that wages always have to be paid with witnesses? Right? Why not go ahead and say that? You always have to pay in the presence of witnesses. Trechalu milsa. None of the say that's complicated, right? To say that wages always have to be paid in the presence of witnesses, that's going to be difficult. I have an meikara. So we'll say, so why not go ahead and say that halacha l'maisa, you should pay your employees at the beginning of the day. Beginning of the day, right? Prepay. To which the Gemara says, Shnei rotzim b'akava. No one wants that. We'll say, why does no one want that? No one wants that. So the employer doesn't want that because he may not have the funds available right now, and the employee doesn't want it. Why? Because then he has to watch over the money the entire day. We'll stop over here for today. I will start a little bit mid-theme. Let's pick up with this tomorrow. We'll say, incredible Gemara. Shkoyach. All right, Chevron Zoom. Have a great day, everyone. We are on. Emeres Hashem.